Hey everybody, it's Mo, your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. Super excited because I've got John Tigh. He's founder and partner at Clever Cognitive. And in this episode, we talk about what's the moment that he realized that growth is great, that he should focus on business development, relationship building skills. John gives a bunch of really powerful tips in this episode, in particular, some really powerful phrasing that can enroll others into solutions and the kind of ways that you might be able to help them with, whether it's paid or unpaid. Deepening that relationship is paramount, as you know, when it comes to everything that we teach, really playing that long game. And John tells us how to connect with others and give some real practical tips on how to do that in this episode. Now, before we dive into the episode, you know the drill. If you're looking to deepen relationships, and if you're stretched for time, head over to growbigplaybook.com because you can download a white paper that we've written on how do you deepen relationships very quickly. That's at growbigplaybook.com. All right, here is John Tigh, founder and partner at Clever Cognitive. Hey everybody, it's Mo Bunnell, your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. Man, I've got one of the most high energy, biggest thought leader, past clients, friends, people on the show today, John Tigh. Really excited to have you on the show today, John. Let's get right into it, man. Tell me of like, when was the moment that you realized growth is great? That not just being an expert, but learning this growth stuff so you can use your expertise to help more people was a good thing.
Sure. First, thanks for having me on, Mo. All the same to you. I just love our relationship, and I'm so glad to be here today. You know, the truth is I was bitten by a radioactive statement of work about a dozen years ago. And ever since then, I've just had this incredible superpower for crafting the right statement of work in the right moment. The truth is actually a little less sexy than that, right?
Do
I
you
was
do you like spin a web and pull people in too?
exactly.
Like, how does
Not,
I know
not
where you're
quite
headed with this metaphor? I
genuine.
love it.
Yeah, I don't want to get into any IP conflicts with anyone over spider webs, but certainly webs of convoluted business process is probably about where I play. I've been working in consulting, and there's that dual life of delivery plus looking for the next gig, and so I wasn't a very good salesperson. I always thought sales was icky and a sort of
Yep.
used car salesman, always be closing kind of vibe. And it wasn't until honestly, you and I had connected in Grow Big, and I really started rethinking that. And I don't even consider myself a salesperson now. I'm a relationship person. And the
Hmm.
better I cultivate relationships, the more likely it is that I will be of service at some point to those individuals in the future. So I have a sort of open door policy. I am a collector of people. One of my favorite things to ask folks um, when I go through this process of getting to know them is I ask them what I consider my uncomfortable question, which is what makes you a unique and special flower? That typically will crack people in two very specific directions. The high energy, can't wait to get creative and talk about this, and the recoiling, not exactly sure if I should call HR, but let me think about that for a minute. And then it's usually business related. And that typically breaks right brain and left brain pretty consistently for me. So that is when I started in business development to really think, wow, this is a heart and people centered sport. And if I can be of service, that really energizes me. And I
Yeah.
want to do more of that.
Well, let's go deeper because
Mhm.
two things. One is I remember the exact class that you were in. Like, we were in Philadelphia, right? And I actually think you were in the middle of the room at, like, we had squares in a we were jam packed in a small room, and you were like at the middle table. You got there early, and like, I'm like, I like this guy, like, right away, right? And then you were just dove into the content and have used it so well. But that's the first thing. The second thing is you're incredibly good at playing the long game, like getting to know each other, getting to know another person, finding ways to be helpful to them, whether or not
Mhm.
there's anything commercially to do now doesn't matter. Like, you're like, invest in the person. So that lines up with everything you just said. So let's get super practical. because
Sure.
some experts can have a hard time doing that. You know, it feels like, well, I should look and see if there's some kind of statement of work to write or engagement letter to write, and if not, I move along. And you believe the complete opposite, and that's come around to you a hundredfold because you've been so successful. So, super practically, you meet somebody for the first time, and you ask them that interesting question: what are you looking for as follow-ups? What are you looking for as a win for a first meeting? Just let us peek into your mind.
Sure. So typically I look for, let's call them disturbances in the force, right? Where do they seem to hesitate or have a moment where something's irritating them? Where do they express disappointment at untapped potential or something they haven't quite gone for yet? I'm a big fan of asking about the mission, vision, values, what's on their radar coming up close because I want to be helpful in those things that apply immediately. So I usually listen for those little disturbances to ask more questions around that. How do you feel about this? Do you have enough staffing for that? Do you typically find that your data is where you need it to be and it's performing the way you would like it to? I will ask those types of questions to try to just root around a little bit in a non-threatening way
Yep.
um, to see where those disturbances are.
Well, that makes sense. And with at Clever Cognitive, you have you're basically accelerating innovation at different organizations. So I want to be clear here. When you even said mission, vision, values, you're not. I mean, maybe that's for the whole company, but I have a feeling you're doing that more at the personal level, or what that person controls, or where they want to go with their career, their life, or things like that. Correct and not correct? Your thoughts?
So for me, mission, vision, values is one of those things that ends up on a graph database or a mind map. So
Yep.
there is the corporate enterprise version, there should be the work group version, there should be the individual version, and they should all connect in some stripe, right? Because it should all play to the big vision and goals of the organization.
Yep.
So I always look for those linkages or note when there's a gap, right, within those linkages, because then that also tells me a lot because it's sometimes humbling to the organization to say, well, you're saying you want this, but it's not supported over here. There's a gap here. How might we be able to fill this, right? And that how might we is a very sort of design thinking question that I really appreciate because it exudes possibility, it exudes collaboration, and for me, again, this heart-centered, relationship-centered type of development is all around how do we go on this journey together and how can
Yep.
I be of use?
So let me dive in deeper. I just want you to pause a moment on that. How might we? Because,
Mhm.
like, one of our favorite phrases, people gone through the course, like, would it be helpful if is a great question. I really like that. How might we? So, how do you use how might we? Go deeper.
Yeah. How might we think about preparing ourselves for the third quarter? Or just today,
Mm.
I got asked to sit in with a Fortune 10 company. Their senior leadership is about to approach their executive team, so it's like the top of the top of a globally well-known company. And they said, we would like you to come in and talk to us about how we can position what we're doing to the executives. And I said, cool. How might we think about positioning this? How might we think about the people in the room and what they're looking for and what they're used to? How might we play against that? So, one of the things I'm always a fan of opposites or of titrated discomfort. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, at some point. But I always like to get these moments of clarity, or as I like to think of them, selective polarization, where I can find if a team is in with an idea or out with an idea. Because the clearer you can get in those small little moments, the more clarity you have overall, right? And so, whether you're selling ideas or selling product or services, that to me is the most interesting way of doing it. Is how might we do this together? Gets that buy-in and
Yep.
it accelerates the momentum.
Oh man, I love it. Okay, so slight shift because I want to go back to something else that you do really well that other people could really learn from. John, you're
Mhm.
incredibly good at connecting people. So we touched on that a moment ago, but I want to go deeper because I want to get super practical for our audience, and I want to peek inside like how you do it. So one of the things that I've seen you do doing over and over with me, and I really appreciate it, is you're like, oh man, who could I introduce you to? Or have you met so and so? Or you really need to check out so and so's content. I think you're really going to like it. Here's a link. Like you're always connecting people with ideas. And what it does is it just keeps you top of mind. You've stayed in touch with me. Hopefully, I've stayed in touch with you. I even then when I meet somebody randomly, I'm like, oh man, John Tigh said we should meet, right? That happened with Michael Port one time when I met Michael, because you've been hammer
Wow.
on me for years, like, you got to see Michael Port's content. And then he was on the show. And then when I met with him, I'm like, I think John Tigh has been saying we need to meet. He's like, oh yeah, John's awesome. So you weren't even there, but all this goodwill was flowing back to you at another time because you always are thinking long game, introducing people. So you're in this first meeting, or you're in meeting number 27 with somebody.
Mhm.
How are you creating? You said you're a collector of interesting like people. How
Yeah.
are you thinking about that? What advice do you give somebody who would like to do more of that but hasn't? Go.
Gosh. Okay. So one of the ways that I'm sort of insatiable when it comes to curiosity. So
Yeah.
there's always that thing, and I think you and I have that in common. So, I could be watching a video and see a location, the music video kind of thing, and there'll be a store. Well, don't you know, I'll go and look up that store and see where it is and then say, "Oh, I'm going to go visit that town."
I
I
do the
just did
same
that last
thing. Yeah.
I just did that last week, and I think
Yeah.
that's kind of fun. When it comes to people, I enjoy their stories because again, you can't talk heart centered and you can't really talk design thinking without talking about empathy, right? And the first thing we think of, or at least I think of, when it comes to empathy is the precursor to empathy is curiosity. If you don't have any curiosity, you can't get yourself in that person's shoes or understanding their way of being. So for me, it's about um, collecting their story and what makes them unique, as I had said. And then the taxonomist inside of me starts to categorize things like, okay, most superpowers around business development. He plays frisbee. He's got a donkey named Louis, and so I know these things. And should those come up at some point with someone else, I make those connections,
Yeah.
and I believe in connecting others. I have a very well defined mindset that is not scarcity based, right? It is abundance based. And so we can all win if we're all doing things together. And I look at sales the same way. If I withhold information, no one's going to talk to me again. They'll be like, meh, that guy's a jerk. If I give away that information and it is of value, then hopefully there's at some point when the moment and time and temperature are right, there's some reciprocity or at least some consideration for the things that I do. Um, that's typically how I roll. When I know two people absolutely must meet, I just I don't really have a word for it, but let's talk about those. There were these candies growing up called Gushers, where it was like a liquid
Yeah.
center. When you bit into the candy, it was all over the place.
Yeah.
So my emails are kind of like gushers because I'll be like introducing you and I'll say, this is Mo and this is what makes him awesome. And then I'll say, this is Sally and this is what makes her awesome. And this is what makes you both collectively need to know each other right now. So go do that. And it's that type of energy and positive sort of introduction. And I just find that it's not just a warm interview. It's sort of like a blaze or a warm intro. It's like a blazing intro. And that's the way I like to do it because I
Yeah.
just believe that at some point it just makes everything better.
Well, I'd like to put a bow on that and sort of close out this episode for everybody, because I think a lot of people don't understand or the value of what we're talking about here. For example, sometimes professionals can enter a meeting and think, oh, I'm either in or out. I'm going to qualify, in air quotes for you audio listeners. And I say that with like trepidation, like it's gross to me a little bit. There's a certain amount of qualification that has to happen, but the idea of like, I'm going to be in or out on this one transaction and I'm going to figure that out in a 30-minute Zoom call or breakfast meeting or something is gross to me. What, John, you do that I think everybody can learn from is by connecting people, you don't just get one interaction, you get like half a dozen or a dozen. Because if John meets you and he introduces you to somebody else, A, you've already got one, you've already been valuable one time. Then when the two people meet, the first thing they say is, how do you know John? Oh, John's awesome. Over at Clever Cognitive, they helped us with this and that. That's another one. Then the next time they meet, they remember you again. They meet when they see the calendar invite. They meet when they follow up and say, I met Sue. So there's like the whole stream of things that happen after you introduce somebody to someone else that's in a really valuable, non-commercial way, just being helpful. It actually doesn't have one action like the time that the introduction's made. It has a half a dozen interactions, and they're all positive, and they all come back to you, in multiple. So anyway, John, I think you're really great at that. Close us out with this. People are going to want to learn more about what you do at Clever Cognitive. Obviously you accelerate innovation in a whole bunch of different ways, whether it's from coaching to building technology. Where should they go?
You can find me at john@clevercognitive.com if you want to just reach out directly. You can find me on LinkedIn, or you can find the collective us of Clever Cognitive at clevercognitive.com.
Perfect. John, man, thanks for being on the show. And everybody, mash those follow and subscribe buttons. Blow up your phone with notifications when new episodes of Real Relationships, Real Revenue comes out, because we've got 4 more great action-packed superhero metaphor linking episodes coming up with John next. Thanks.
I'm grateful, Mo. Thanks.